Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of my Busch Gardens Williamsburg recreation. Last time I showed off my builds for Alpengeist and Le Scoot, making some headway into the Germany area. And today, as you can see, we haven't made any further progress into the park, but I have done a lot of work in finishing cleaning up some of the previous areas in France and New France, getting those parts of the park done so I don't have to worry about them anymore. So just to take you on kind of a quick tour of the France area compared to what we had a few episodes ago, show you where I'm at. As you can see, I've made a lot of progress on finishing up these buildings, getting some of these areas filled in with foliage, looking a lot more finalized, which I'm very happy about. As I mentioned, this area has been kind of a slog for me, but we're making progress, getting things done, so I'm feeling good about it. We've got the theater over here. I spent a lot of time putting in some stadium seating. So this is basically just a lot of wooden coaster track and mine ride track and maybe even some mini coaster track. I don't remember even at this point what all I put in here. But you layer it up a certain way. It looks a little bit like stadium seating. Some of the wooden track looks a little bit shiny, so from this angle it's a bit weird, but from most of the angles, I think it looks pretty good. The real life theater has these awful gaudy blue seats, so I've got some awful gaudy blue wooden coaster track here to replicate that. I think it turned out okay. First time I've done a build like this, I think, to make seats with the wooden coaster track. It's very tedious, turns out. A lot of work just copying and pasting a bunch of these diagonal pieces in here to fill in all the gaps, get all those things lined up. And as you can see by the entertainers walking around, there is an actual functional path back here. So you can walk around this area if you so desire. I currently have it closed off to peeps with some invisible no entry signs because I had a bunch of people getting lost back here. So it's probably just gonna stay closed and we'll just have the staff walking around back here. But having a little bit of movement is gonna be better than nothing. And it's definitely gonna be better than having a lot of lost peeps back in there. So that'll do for now. I'm not entirely sure what all in this area has changed compared to the last episode I talked about it. I've just been kind of working here and there in little bits and pieces for the France and New France areas when I have time. But I did clean up a lot of the pathing in here. I remember last time I showed it off, the place by the train station, this was a big old mess. And it's still kind of a mess. We have a lot of crowded peeps back here. I don't know what they're trying to do, but it looks like an actual park now that you can actually walk around in and go to the buildings and ride the ride and all that good stuff. So did some significant tweaking on InvadR as well. One thing I mentioned with that, the Le Scoot queue was way too close to the roller coaster. So I have been tweaking those things. I was able to shift this turnaround back a couple tiles. Had to flatten out a couple of these hills a little bit in order to give myself enough room to make that all work out. But I think honestly it turned out fine. I even had some room for some supports over here, some of these big bulky supports. You like to see these on wooden coasters sometimes. I usually don't like doing huge bulky wooden supports myself. One, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to do these, and sometimes I feel like they're not super realistic. But every once in a while, especially on a big turnaround like this, they do look pretty impressive. I think I like them best on an area like this that's low to the ground, so you can see them going out in this wide area, but they don't look so tall, so they're not as bulky. So I don't know, there's lots and lots of different ways you can do wooden coaster supports. It's also tricky because InvadR actually has steel supports. They're just lattice supports that look like wooden coaster, but they're made of steel, which is why, of course, my build here, they are gray, which does affect this. I don't know if you really would have this kind of supports if you have steel supports. You definitely would if you had wooden supports, because they need a bit more mass in order to take in all the forces and everything, but steel can probably handle it a little bit better. But like I said, I think it looks kind of cool, so there's nothing else to do in this particular section anyway, so might as well throw in some nice little details in here. Similarly, made some improvements to Le Scoot as well, added some station and queue coverings. I did wind up putting in, even though it's a little bit hard to see, a dual loader station. Probably going to be easiest if we use Cutaway View to get Alpengeist out of the way. It isn't functional. You probably could make a functional dual loader station with some hacks if you really wanted to. Personally, I don't really feel like that kind of effort is warranted if the ride isn't like the main focus of the whole park, and Le Scoot definitely is not the main focus of the whole park. So having just a bit of dummy track in here and a couple of fake logs to replicate the dual loader station, I think does the job just fine. I think it looks pretty good. It definitely gets the effect across. One other thing I wanted to touch on real quick. I did mention some last minute tweaks to Griffin an episode or two ago. Did put in some of these big bulky rotodrop supports for the main catwalk here, just to give it a bit extra bulk, make this area stand out a little bit better, so it didn't look like the coaster is going to fall over at any second. I think that does really help for builds like this, even if it's not 100% realistic, but it definitely adds a lot more interest to the coaster, I think. One other fun effect I added to Griffin, you may or may not have noticed, is that the splashdown is now functional. If you watch the coaster as it goes through the splashdown, it does have a little splash effect. There it goes. It's a little bit subtle, but I think it looks great. I think it's a cool little technique. There's another hack I stole from Enox and the Brews dive coaster entry from earlier this year. They also put a splashdown on their dive coaster, and I figured if it's possible, I gotta do it. Gotta make that splashdown work. It's not even a particularly difficult hack. With the ride vehicle editor, you can take a look at the cars here. So there are 3 visible dive coaster trains, but there's actually 5 vehicles on the train, and that's because a couple of them were actually coaster boats. Coaster boats being the vehicles that are used for the water coaster, which will have a splashing effect when they go over the water trough type track. And there is actually that type track here, it's just invisible. So I believe it's the second car? Yeah, the second car, vehicle 2, is pushed a little bit further back into the middle of the train, colored invisible, so you can't really see it. You can sort of see it glitching through a little bit if you look closely. It's subtle enough that you don't really notice it if you're not paying attention. And it's enough to get the water splash effect going, which is pretty awesome. Really happy with the way that turns out. So again, credits to Enox and the Brew for coming up with that effect and making it available for people like me to steal. So yeah, I think that's about all we have to go over today. Obviously, mostly just a lot of little detailing going into this area over here, but it's a lot of effort, and I think it's starting to pay off. I'm not super happy with all of these buildings. Some of them are a little bit too under detailed, maybe a little bit too small. So I'm going to play around a bit with some more different like wall textures, maybe change some footprints around a little bit and see if I can get some different designs that maybe aren't necessarily 100% realistic, but are going to look cool. It's all part of the process. But as far as the France and New France areas go, I think I am at a good point where I can finally call these good for now and start to move on into other parts of the park and maybe move on to the Germany area, get past Alpengeist and see what there is to build back here. So we've made a ton of progress so far. I guess if you pull back a little bit, it's good, like what, 3/4 of the park done. So we've come quite a long way in these few episodes and really happy with the way things are shaping up. Really proud of what I got so far and looking forward to getting into the Germany area. Some cool things to build over here. But we will get into those next time. In the meantime, hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.